So just very quickly, because we don't want to rehearse the arguments that many of you will be familiar with, we know that the origins and patterns of national trade union development, if you like, reflect both domestic and subnational and, of course, international trends and influences and intertwined transitional challenges. But nonetheless, there are certain threads, if you like, of union development that are quite identifiable and reflect some levels of convergence. And indeed, Michel's recognized this with his iron law of oligarchy, I should say. And so what we're talking about here is how unions and confederations can rigidify over time as they enlarge, how they can become quite hierarchical, and of course, how that can be quite time-consuming in the pursuit of workers' interests. We also reflect in our chapter on Hyman's, what he calls the legitimacy crisis of the liberal participative democracy approach. And I think we've all seen evidence of that. And he makes a call for democracy to go back to the community level and to empower non-governmental public services and thus have more of a grassroots participatory approach in general, and one that will help us to restore a pursuit of wider social transformation. So all of these challenges, of course, are heated and enlarged and engorged, if you like, by the climate change dilemmas of which a number of us are familiar, and the mitigation of them, of course, for industry workers and workplaces. And as Caleb Good said a few years ago, climate change has thus become an industrial issue and will determine the future of employment relations. And we've all heard the mantra of, you know, don't deal with climate, then you may as well not bother dealing with working conditions, right? So we're talking about a tightrope walk here, where stakeholders need to pursue, obviously, industrial and economic aims, but to do it in a recalibrated way and with concern for the environment. And indeed, in the European context, we have the EU industrial policies of recent years, and that includes a Green Deal industrial plan. And this is an emphasis here, I guess, on a lot of competitive efforts. There is calls for it to become much more socialized in many ways, and for member states to try and converge in their adherence to its goals. And even that is up for dispute, I guess, in terms of interpretation. So a number of unions, but not all, have trained some of their attention to climate change and politics at different levels. And the work of Paul Hampton is excellent here in terms of laying this out for us as a bit of a model and map. And we've also got some work there that Valeria and I have been engaged in, which looks at the conditions that can help or hinder unions' capacity to go down this route. We've got a bit wordy with these slides, so I'm just trying to paraphrase a little bit for you. Okay, so over to Valeria now, I think. Is it? No? No, not yet. Sorry. So not over to Valeria, but anyway, thinking about union membership also as another challenge from within, if you like. So we know that in many contexts that unions are seeking to look at a much more diverse array of worker interests and to try and reconcile those interests in a formidable and fashionable way. And what this means is that they're trying to represent expanding and complex interests. At the same time, this has an intense meaning for how they're governed, how they strategize, and how they adopt a well-supported, if you like, multilateral and multi-level response to environmental demands. At the same time, trying to stay relevant to the more conventional bread and butter or working conditions and pay issues of trade unions, and navigating that against all those intertwined transitions that I mentioned earlier. So what we've seen, of course, myriad ways of trying to handle the situation, to get ahead of the game, if you like. And of course, Gregor's and Melanie's new book looks at a number of these issues around what do the union efforts look like. And we can think about the more conventional strategies around recruiting and organizing and advocacy, sometimes these US-style organizing as well, to widening the collective bargaining agenda, to restructuring and mergers. And of course, for many unions, this is daily life, but also thinking about local partnerships, lobbying for regulatory change, and as our focus is on social movement unionism in terms of union and civil body alliance building.
So, yes, so I will try to a bit go from an analytical point of view again, because as you have understood, this is not an empirical paper, but it's more a kind of analytical reflection upon the challenges that trade unions are facing vis-a-vis climate change. So the situation in Europe, of course, there is a lot of attention in Europe at the very moment about decarbonization. And what decarbonization means, in fact, is kind of shifting from these fossil fuels to carbon-free and renewable energy sources. And this is also part of the goals within the Paris Agreement target. Now, we see that these kind of goals are very challenging for unions in the sense that, you know, they bring positive but also negative aspects to the fore, in a sense that you know, unions basically are facing the difficulties to say, okay, so we need to, of course, protect jobs in areas where, in fact, a lot of these, you know, fossil fuels sort of things exist. But at the other end, unions are also trying to push forward for new solutions and trying, or at least thinking upon the possibility to organize and to increase membership in sectors like, in fact, energy, green energy, where they are a bit less present. So we see this kind of dilemmas coming very much to the fore, and this has a lot of implication for jobs and offshoring. I think what the ETUC said in 2024 resembles very well, at least for us, what are in fact the challenges the unions, as I said so far, are facing. Again, you know, unions from manufacturing, power generation sectors in particularly developed countries stress these kind of downsides or nuanced impacts for workers. And for or enforcing stricter carbon emission targets, while on the others they stress the creation of these green and decent jobs and workplaces, as I said earlier. But of course, the main challenge is how to increase capacity in these new green workplaces on the one hand. On the other hand, is how, in fact, to kind of solve the problems that in the other parts of the world where these more you know, kind of challenge for emissions exist, how to, you know, to deal with these kind of things, and how to, you know, build new solutions in this kind of area. So there is a lot of inequality, if you like, also in the way in which the effects of decarbonization put the trade unions, you know, to the front, how decarbonization will be managed, and to what extent unions will be part of the managing of the solutions of decarbonization, of course, across regions, across countries, within regions, remains still a very big challenge. Yes, please. So what we said in our chapter basically is that if we look at you know, the nation political economy and the geopolitical interest, for example, in fact, related to energy production, how this can influence union policy position. What we see here is that probably the solution is that these, you know, challenges will face and will bring to a new geopolitical map which needs to be created. And here we also draw some kind of consideration by using also Ayman's work, trying to not really, well, try to indicate some possible trajectory that unions might follow, how might look like. And we see here, you know, that probably unions, depending on their own kind of identity, orientations and approaches, whether more class-based, social or market orientation, they will, you know, choose for different solutions. So we might envisage that these will impact very strongly on the union in different countries, union confederations. We also see, and this is particularly the work that we have been developing with Adrian Thomas from LISER, you know, we see, in fact, the importance, probably the climate change brings the importance of the national confederation more than the sectoral and company structures in trade unions organization and way to organize, in the sense that we envisage the importance of national confederation of the unions to really kind of develop cohesive positions vis-a-vis the climate change, and to do that, of course, in alliance and in articulation with sectoral and company level position. But the role we see here that national confederation might play is much stronger than what sectoral and company level union structure might play. And And next one, yes, in fact. So we, in the chapter, we also emphasize some, again, factors that we think will affect, in the light of all what I've been telling so far, will affect unions' ability to build up a cohesive strategy on climate change. And we indicate some of these factors here. As you can see, they are here in bullet points. Now, first of all, there is these, oh, okay. So very, so there is the issue of the members' interest and membership, and we leave it just there because it's politically and, you know, socially very, very sensitive issue. The bureaucratic decision-making processes that unions are facing, and the difficulties, as I said, if I go back to what I was saying before, to articulate, particularly by national confederations with their own sectoral and company level structures, where also level of action, particularly at the company level, exists. Now, I want to say here that, and I conclude, that addressing the contradiction of climate change for us, and we had just, I think yesterday, a piece coming up in Social Europe, where we tried to bring some message to the fore. We think that addressing the contradiction between economic growth and green transitions for unions, and I would say also broadly the unions, but particularly for unions, requires rethinking and reframing industrial relations, and particularly rethinking and reframing industrial relations institutions and the role of collective bargaining as an important institution for redistributions of gains. So what does it mean in concrete? It means that we believe in the capacity of trade unions and industrial relations to help fix what has been broken up by the non-existence of a cohesive and sustainable approach to work. There is always been something wrong with capitalism. That's not what we say, and that's also what, you know, many other scholars have been arguing here, many of those here in this aula. And industrial relations and trade unions actors need, therefore, to make this redistribution pay from not only an economic, but also from a social perspective. That's what sustainability means, and that's what we emphasize in this blog, which means, in fact, to look at well-being and sustainable growth, and not only economic productivity-based or productivity-based growth. So I leave it here to Jane.
Much? 0 minutes, okay. Okay. All right, I will try and précis as much as I can. Thank you. So we in our draft chapter, we then switch from the European context to the Southern context, and in particular Aotearoa, New Zealand. And we also take a bit of a switch in terms of our emphasis of theories and approaches. So here we're looking at, where are we? Just transition. And we've given you a sort of cursory definition there, but just to briefly note that this emerged as a framework from the international trade union movement. And Piero and Leining's work here is particularly instructive. But also it's increasingly moved beyond this job versus environment debate and tension to emphasize, of course, social justice and protection in a low carbon economy. So the idea here with Just Transition, as you know, is to bring everybody together at all levels, but and in a unidirectional fashion, I guess. But I guess the neoliberal background and backstop, if you like, means that some of the features of Just Transitions frameworks have come up for debate and contention. So for example, we could think about how inclusive they actually are in practice, who's leading them, what is the role of the state, and so forth. And again, Paul Hampton's work suggests that there are different ways of broaching just transition in 3 broad strands, I guess. So it could be through a policy that's driven essentially within a neoliberal agenda. It could be more of ecological modernization, where the state has a heavier role, or it could indeed be a more radical class-based approach. And then, of course, there are policies that emanate from those different approaches. Thank you. Why I didn't use bigger font, I don't know. So anyway, so consequently, we see different strategies and practices, and this is within a complex policy environment with development. And this means there's been a lot of stress testing, of course, for government, union governance, and engagement and coordination, and its ability to resource it all as well. And as we've said before, and I think Valeria alluded to, A minority of unions have engaged, and Taya Yarks yesterday also talked about unions having varying propensity, if you like, to come forth in this way. And this responds to a need, often an instrumental one, for revitalisation, but also to the wider socioeconomic challenges that are presented. So you can see that unions are obviously conflicted in many ways. They face contradictory priorities, and they need to pull together with coalitions that have multi-party endeavours, which is not always easy and has occurred in a patchy and uneven fashion across the globe and in different union movements. So in the text, which we haven't really got a lot of time to go into, but we focus here on the New Zealand Council of Trade Unions and its larger affiliates of what they've been doing when it comes to alliance building, and in trying to shift the role towards more of an SMU approach. And they've encountered quite a few obstacles within the national context, including defensive affiliate behavior, weak resourcing again, falling membership, all those old chestnuts, if you like. And of course, the path dependency of unions in terms of where have they been in the past and how can they U-turn or move that forward. And then if they're moving into coalition activity, issues around how do we reconcile different modus operandi with all our other stakeholders. Okay, that's okay. Yeah, we can talk through the questions maybe. Yeah, okay, thank you.